All right, welcome back. We are now going to finish up our discussion in IMM Presence with the actual IMM Presence Federation topic. Now, this is going to be an integration between presence servers, essentially. And we've already talked about the integration between Communications Manager and the IMM Presence server, and also the Cisco Jabber client, and taking advantage of the integration that we just did using soft phone, desk phone mode, and also exchanging instant messages. So, Presence Federation is going to allow us to basically exchange these messages between different presence servers or different presence domains. And this federation term is something that you shouldn't be scared of. It's a new term for some of you, but basically it's just another type of integration is all this really comes down to. So let's try to think of it that way, and it's just another type of integration and maybe just another method by which we need to configure an integration. So let's move over to the actual slides themselves, and let's talk about what it is. So obviously we're talking about IMM Presence collaboration or IMM Presence information that we're going to be exchanging between an IMM Presence server and a third-party server or another IMM Presence server. We're going to be sharing this IMM Presence information within an organization or between two or more organizations. So in this case, in our system here, maybe these are the same organizations or maybe they're different. It depends on what we want to configure there. They can be the same organization or the different one, and we're still going to use this XMPP federation for configuring between two presence servers. Or they could be a different organization with a third-party server like Microsoft OCS, and we would need to use a SIP federation for that. So we have, first of all, two categories here, which are intra-domain and inter-domain federation. And this can either be SIP or XMPP based. So we're going to be using the XMPP based federation here because we're talking about two presence servers wanting to be integrated at this point. So we're going to integrate the HQ IMM Presence server with the Site B IMM Presence server here. So very, very simple configuration on the presence side. Not a whole lot has to be done here. Now let's have a look at it here. This Presence Interdomain Federation, XMPP Federation, and settings. So we're talking about an interdomain federation here. First of all, we've got to select this drop-down box to turn it on. We've got to turn on the status of this interdomain federation. We've also got to set our security mode, and we could set this to something that's highly secure if we want, or we could set it to the easiest way possible for us in the lab, which is going to be no TLS. Also, we're going to set our dial-back secret, which is just going to be a password, like a shared secret between the two devices. So if the passwords don't match, the federation won't come up, essentially. So we've got to set that secret in there, something that the other side is going to be able to put in as well. So that's under Interdomain Federation, XMPP Federation, and Settings. So let's jump over there real quick to, where'd it go? Yeah, we can do it on Site B. So this is the Site B IMM Presence server. And I've got, obviously we were demoing out the HQ IMM Presence server, and I went ahead and just configured the Site B IMM Presence integration along with a couple users over there, so that way we can demo out this, this federation between the two. So if we do Presence, Interdomain Federation, XMPP Federation, and Settings, here's where all that's actually set. And see, it's nothing more than what we configured in the screenshot here. We're turning it on, we're saying no TLS, we've got that dial-back secret as well. So in addition to that, we've got to go into serviceability here, IMM Presence serviceability, and go to Tools and Network Services. And actually, I think it's in Feature Services, sorry about that. It's in this Cisco XCP XMPP Federation Connection Manager. You've got to actually start that one manually. So you've got to go out, after you configure the federation status, you've got to adjust this and say, we're going to start this service because it's down by default. So you've got to make sure that that's up. So once you do that, now you're ready to go. And the thing that's going to be in the middle of this integration is, drum roll, DNS. So DNS is going to make this integration go. And you're thinking like, really? DNS is going to be doing this for us? Yeah, I mean, this is going to be the method by which these servers talk is through DNS. So let's draw this out and see how this actually happens. So if I've got my, IMM presence server over here, let's just say that's the HQ IMP, and I've got my Site B IMM presence over here, along with my Jabber clients, that are connected to both of these. Now, in order for them to actually talk together through this XMPP federation, they have to use DNS. So we've got to have a DNS server in the middle of all this. So we're going to have these dotted lines essentially to the DNS server. And that means that we've got to have our, our network card. You think about how you would configure DNS on your Windows or Mac machine. You've got to set up, the DNS server that you want to use. If you're not using DHCP, if you're going to be manually configuring that, you've got to set it up to use a specific server. We've got to set it to the IP address of this DNS server, which in our case is 10.10.13.16. So both of these servers have got to be looking at that DNS server in order to be able to resolve the host that DNS server has. And we talked about this way back in the infrastructure setting or section in these videos. Is DNS is going to resolve host names. That's the whole purpose of it. Now we also said that this IMM presence service is in the ipexpert.com domain. And this IMM presence server is in the cucm.com domain. So we've got to have then on our DNS server 2 different domains. We've got to have our cucm.com along with all the hosts that are under cucm.com. So like maybe we're going to put in sbimp.cucm.com. Maybe that's going to be the host that we want to use for our IMM presence server. We've also got to have on our DNS server we've got to have ipexpert.com. And then the hosts associated with that. In addition to that, we've got to have this other parameter here that's going to allow us to resolve this XMPP, federation. So, we'll talk about that in a second here. But obviously, what needs to happen here in this case is that the IMM presence server has got to somehow, resolve the information for the other server. If we're going to have a federation, basically it's looking at the domain name for the other server along with the host name. So it's got to send out a request to the DNS server. And that DNS server will go and look at its actual hosts and domains that it has, and what it's responsible for, and then it'll actually send a response back, with the information that the HQ server is looking for. We'll talk about what that is, and then the HQ server will now know to go to this other server itself. So it's got to hit the DNS server, DNS responds, and then the HQ IMM presence server will go to the Site B IMM presence server to resolve the information that it wants to resolve. So let's actually look at this. And this is going to be something actually that's readily available to you in the Cisco documentation. So if we go to Firefox here and go to our Cisco documentation that's going to be available to you in the lab, let's go to our Unified Communications. We're going to go to UC Applications here and Present Software. And then IMM Presence Service. And let's go to 9.1. and Configuration Guides. From there, we can click on any one of these because they all go to the same page. And you're going to get a page that looks like this. Now, under the 9.1 itself, we've got to find the Interdomain Federation for IMM Presence Service on CUCM. So let's click that. And now from there, we can find, if we scroll down on the left here, the IMM Presence Service configuration for XMPP Federation. And that's what we're looking for. This is XMPP Federation. Now you can see what we're actually configuring here. And so you can go through and it gives you a whole rundown of what we're doing, an idea of how we're configuring this, and then it actually gives you the configuration itself. So this is great information here. So it tells you how to turn the XMPP Federation on, the security settings if you want to set those up, and now the DNS configuration. And this is what you really want because if your DNS server is not configured for you, you're going to need to configure it. So you're going to do these things, these things called server records or SRV records. So remember, when we have regular hosts here in the system, these are going to be called A records, right? We have A records that resolve hosts. And now we're going to have a different type of record for each domain, and that's going to be the server record or the SRV record. or not server record, but service record. So it's a record of a service that we're trying to use here. So SRV. So that's going to be for each domain, because obviously for each of these domains, we're going to be looking for a specific type of service. So let's go back and look at the documentation here. So XMPP DNS SRVs in an interdomain federation deployment. So we scroll down here, we've got a specific domain. This one's example.com, substitute ipexpert.com or cucm.com here. And we're using this XMPP server. It's grayed out here, but you can see it here. It's _ XMPP -server. And that's the actual service that we're using. And it's not something that's selectable, even though it's in a drop-down box. You actually have to type that in. So _ XMPP -server. We're using the protocol TCP, so that's _ TCP. Priority and wait are not important. And we have to put the port number, 5269. And that's the port number that this communication is going to happen here. And then you have to put the host offering the service. And you can definitely put an IP address here if you want. Or you can put an actual host name as well. So it just depends on what you want. A host name being like hqimp.ipexpert.com or something like that. And now, and there's a way to actually verify this, right? Because this pink line that I drew is basically this HQIMP server is talking to the DNS server, and it's saying, I need to look up an SRV record for cucm.com. And I'm looking specifically for the _XMPP-service record. I'm looking specifically for that service record. And so the DNS server obviously needs to have a record like that in order to respond positively that it's going to be able to tell it where to go. So if it does, it's going to say, yes, I do have a record, and then here's the information as it sends it out, right? So we can verify that by doing an NS lookup. And of course, we've got to have, whatever machine we're doing the NS lookup from has got to be pointing also to that DNS server. So we're doing an NS lookup here. We're setting the type of record to service, SRV, and we're looking for _ XMPP-server._TCP.domain, which means ipexpert.com or cucm.com. And then it's going to return whether or not it can resolve that information. So really, that's the main configuration here for this. We've got to configure DNS to make sure this happens. Now, there's a couple ins and outs of how we would do that. Let me jump over to the DNS server, and let me actually launch this up here for us. And if I click the Start menu and go to DNS, you can also go to All Programs, Administrative Tools, DNS that way. And so let's scroll up a little bit. This of course, is a Windows DNS server. So the DNS manager is what you get next there. Let me just position that accordingly. Okay. Now, there's this concept of forward lookup zones and reverse lookup zones. Forward lookup zones are going to be resolving your actual domain name, right? So if you type in www.ipexpert.com, there's going to be that host is going to be an A record, www. The domain is going to be ipexpert.com, and that's going to be in a forward lookup zone. So it's going to resolve that to an IP address. Now, if you wanted to resolve an IP address to a host name, you would use a reverse lookup zone. And a lot of these servers now require actually that you have a reverse lookup zone configured, meaning that it's going to verify that really that DNS server is authoritative for both zones. So there's not any spoofing involved there. So if we do that, we can look and expand both of these, forward lookup zones and reverse lookup zones. And you got this thing here. Let's look at the first one for reverse. 13.10.10.in-addr.arpa. And you're like, wow, that is crazy. I have to remember that? Not really. I mean, just remember that that's what it really looks like. But when you have to create a reverse lookup zone here if we're going to be resolving some type of host. And I would just right-click on it and say New Zone. It takes you through this nice little wizard, right? And this isn't too bad here. We would just say Next. We're creating a primary zone. Hit Next again. And to all DNS servers running here, let's hit Next again. IPv4, that's an easy one to pick there. And now the network ID. So, and you know this as well, right? So the network ID we're talking about, if we want to resolve, let's say for the HQ site, that's going to be 10.10.13. Right? 11 would be the pub, 12 is the sub, 13 is the UCCX server, 14 CUC, so forth. So we've got that zone, and notice it creates it here, in gray as 13.10.10.in-adr.arpa. So it creates that for us. Then we hit next, we can say allow secure dynamic updates, and then we can hit finish. So there's really nothing to it, creating that reverse lookup zone. It's all stuff that you already knew. We don't have to kind of guess at any of that. So we've got the information there. Once we create that reverse lookup zone, we don't have to do anything else. Once, when you create your A records, it's going to automatically create a reverse lookup zone record for you. So as you can see, I've already got a bunch of these reverse lookup zone records in here. But let's come back to this in a second here. Let's go back to forward lookup zones. So I've got two domains here that I'm authoritative for. I'm authoritative for the cucm.com domain as well as the ipexpert.com domain. So if I click on ipexpert.com, see all the different hosts within there. So I've got HQCUC, HQIMP, HQPub. So if I type hqpub.ipexpert.com, it will resolve that. If I double click it, here it'll show you, into this IP address, 10.10.13.11. And also you can say, when you add it, let me add a new host here. If I right click and a blank space, I can put a new host, A record, new alias, CNAME, meaning it's an alias to a record, mail exchange record. We're just talking about hosts here. So let's add a new host record. And let's just say test.ipexpert.com. We want that to resolve to 10.10.13.1, which is the default gateway, whatever. And now we're creating an associated pointer record. So that means it's going to create a record in the reverse lookup zone that we already looked at. So if we say add host here, it'll tell you that the host was added successfully. And now you can see test here is resolving the 10.10.13.1. Now let's go back and look at our reverse lookup zones. And let's reload. Refresh, sorry, not reload. So I hit refresh, and then I've got this record in here for the data is test.ipexpert.com. We've got the host or the IP address now, 10.10.13.1. So that's kind of working together. If anybody looks up 10.10.13.1, it's going to resolve test.ipexpert.com, which is the same thing that it will resolve in the reverse order under the forward lookup zones. So once again, you don't necessarily have to create these, but it's important for you to know how that works. So I can delete this now. I don't really need that. So what we do need though is this HQIMP host record. We can put that in there if we want to refer to that as a host, right? If we want to refer to that in the SRV, the service record, as the host. Like I said, we can also use the IP address, but it may ask you to specifically use a domain name. In that case, you've got to create an A record here. So next thing we have to do, we've got that in there. We've got the reverse lookup zone. That's pointing to that. Let me refresh again to get that other one out of there. So we had, HQIMP here, 13.15, right? So that's the reverse of what we had in ipexpert over here. So now we can go over to, actually, let me show you cucm.com as well. So cucm.com, same thing. In this case, we just did IMP, publisher, and Unity connection here. Put the forward lookup zones in there. Obviously those aren't necessary, for the integration, but possible for you to do there. And once again, we have a corresponding reverse lookup zone for that as well. So let's go back to the actual configuration here. Now, this slide is corresponding to the information that we need to put in. Once again, we're putting our domain in, ipexpert.com, cucm.com. Service is going to be that _xmpp-server. TCP_TCP, and then 5269 for the port. And then the host offering that service, of course. So this is corresponding to an A record in your DNS server, and that's going to be resolvable to an IP address as long as you have that configured. Otherwise, you can put an IP address there. Now, let's jump back to our instructions. All right, and this is the actual document that we found in the actual Cisco documentation. So we can scroll down, and it says we've got to create this XMPP server record somehow. So we can do that. Let's see where it says it. Okay, so here's the actual configured DNS SRV record. All right, so create the domain that we want here. We want to go to, this one's called standalone cluster domain. Create whatever you want, of course. We've got the ipexpert.com or cucm.com domain. We've got to go and create this DNS SRV record. So let's go to the server itself and right click on, actually let's go to our ipexpert.com here. Right click and say, where'd it go here? Other new records. So click on other new records, and now it's going to give us a whole list of types that we can choose from. If we scroll down a little bit, we can see that we have this service location or service record. So then we can select that and click create record. Now it gives us the exact screenshot that we had there. Notice that we can select from a list of services here, but it doesn't have XMPP server in there. We've got to actually configure this underscore XMPP-server in the service field there. Protocol, we can't select that either. We've got to type underscore TCP there. Remember, priority and wait were not important, and the port number is 5269. When you scroll back to the information here, we can see that that's exactly what we have. 5269 there. And the host offering this service, like I said, we can put in an IP address, and then it'll take that just fine. Or we can put in the host name, hqimp.ipexpert.com. So we've got to do this for both the cucm.com domain and the ipexpert.com domain. And this is going to be in this TCP protocol. So when we go look for it, you're not going to see this in the actual forward records, root directory. You're going to have to go to this TCP directory here. So if you click TCP, double click it, you see we've got a record here, XMPP server for service location record. And let's double click that, and now you can see the actual record itself. We're pointing towards a domain name. We've got the port number itself there, XMPP server. Looks like that's really good. Let's verify that we have the same thing for cucm.com. And that's going to be right here under cucm.com. Remember, the TCP folder itself is where we're at, XMPP server, and we've got sbimp.cucm.com. And that resolves to an IP address, sbimp to 23.15. Perfect. So now all we have to do is sign into our clients, and basically use this. And of course, we have to also make sure that your IAM-present server is actually pointing at that, DNS server itself. So we can go and look at that too. Let's go to SSH to the actual IAM-present service. Taking a minute here. So we'll log into that, and then we'll be able to see exactly what is set up on the network interface, right? So, and that's important, obviously, because if you're not looking at the correct DNS server, then it's not going to be resolving for you. So let's look at show network ETH0. All right, so within this network command, you see you've got your IP address itself, you've got your subnet mask, you scroll down here to DNS, and you've got 10, 10, 13, 16. So we're pointing at that DNS server. Great, we can do that for the same server, but it's already been done, to make sure that that is set correctly. Now, if that's not set correctly, you have to go utils network. Actually, not utils. We're going to be using set network, so we're making a setting change. So we're going to go set network DNS primary, and then you would type the address there that we're talking about. So this is 10, 10, 13, 16 is our server. So we're already configured there, so we're good. So now it's just a matter of signing in with your Jabber client. And we've got a couple Jabber clients here ready to go for that purpose. And remember, we can go in and make sure that we are using the right DNS server as well. If we do ipconfig/all, we can see we've got DNS server 10, 10, 13, 16. So we're using that here. Great, so we're pointing to the right place. Also, real quick, let's show the verification that this server record's actually, or service record's going to respond back to us. Remember, we do this NS lookup thing. So let's do NS lookup from here. And then, so you can see we're actually pointing to that DNS server 10.10.13.16. Then from there, we can do set type equal SRV. Now we can type in the actual XMPP service. So we do underscore XMPP dash server dot underscore TCP dot IPexpert.com. And that is going to resolve us this 10.10.13.15 IP address in the end. Remember, because it's going to HQIMP, then that resolves to the actual IP address itself. Now let's look up CUCM.com and make sure that's there as well. And it looks like it is, 23.15. So we are good to go now, officially good to go. So let's get out of here. And now let's log in with this Site B, I'm in presence. All right, so we are currently logged in as Site B1 at CUCM.com. We've got this other user located on the HQ cluster, that's HQP1 at IPexpert.com. Now, if I wanted to try to access this user, I could go to File, New, and create a custom contact. Let me put this over here so we can see it. And what was Site B Phone 1? Site B Phone 1 was, log into the server to find out what the username was. Yeah, take your sweet time there, Site B. All right, so from here, once it loads up here, we'll go to User Management, End User, and find that username here. So this was, Site BP1 was Ned Flanders. Okay, so display name, Ned Flanders. Of course, that's not necessarily important, but we want to be accurate, right? So the chat IM address here is going to be sbp1 at cucm.com. And we can put a work phone in there as well if we want, and that was just 2001, if you remember your dial plan. We're going to add that to the contacts folder and say create. And now, if you look at the other machine here, see we've actually got a contact request, hqp1 at ipexpert.com. And so you can allow that or block that. So if we say allow, then now we've got that information. And you can see Ned Flanders here has a green presence status. If I change my presence status over here, you can see that it changes also on the contact itself. Remember, this is going through the federation at this point now. So let's make that back to available. And let's actually see if we can have an instant message here. So, hi Ned. And so you see that pops up over here. So Ned is able to respond then and say, hello, who are we calling from? Barney? All right. So then we've got an instant message session going back and forth. Great. So now we can actually add that user as well. And it goes right to custom contacts. So we can add that user right here. So we could say Barney Gumble, and then use that IM address. Also, we can put the work phone in there as well. So 1001, and add that to the contacts group, let's say. And create the contact. And sometimes you'll notice that it doesn't show up right away. And that you'd have to actually log out of the client and log back in, and then it shows up. But now that we've got a work phone defined for this person, we can actually call that person here, from the IM and presence client. That's not using the federation to do that. That's using the regular integration that we already had set up, right, for the Site B IM and presence server to the Site B CUCM server. So now we've got the ability now to exchange presence status between these two sites. Like, for example, if I went to this phone here and made a call from 1001 to 1002. Let me answer that. Now we can see that this on a call status gets transferred all the way to this other site. So we know that this presence status is being exchanged now between these two servers, and that's coming from the line, which is then going across to the IM presence server across that SIP trunk, and then it's coming across this XMPP federation that we have between those two IM presence servers. So that's how we do an XMPP federation. Once again, this is all going to be DNS basically. There's only one little setting that we have to set in our I'm present server, and that's just basically turning it on in the first place. And then we've got to configure our DNS service records. Once we got that configured, we're ready to go basically. As long as we're pointing at the DNS server, we're ready to go. So that's going to be our Presence Federation lecture there. So thank you again for watching the video, and we will see you in the next one.